Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fluoride Lecture and Dialogue at the Murdock Theatre. We have two distinguished speakers this evening. The first speaker this evening will be Dr. Albert Bergstahler. He earned a PhD degree at Harvard, isn't that correct? And he will be followed by Dr. Paul Connett. Dr. Bergstahler is a professor emeritus at the University of Kansas, where he taught organic chemistry for nearly 40 years. I told him today he was lucky that I got out of that school before he got there. He also holds a BS from the University of Notre Dame and a PhD from Harvard University. He is the editor of the quarterly scientific journal Fluoride, founded in 1968 by the International Society for Fluoride Research. Dr. Bergstahler is also the co-author of Fluoridation, The Great Dilemma, published first in 1978. Following Dr. Bergstahler will be Dr. Paul Connett. Dr. Connett is recognized as the world's leading expert on fluoride toxicity. He is very modest, however, and often attributes that position to Dr. Bergstahler. Dr. Connett has spent the past 16 years researching the effects of fluoride on human health and the environment. He is executive director of the Fluoride Action Network, a nonprofit coalition of citizens and scientists working to broaden awareness about the toxicity of fluoride compounds and the harmful consequences of community water fluoridation. Dr. Connett is the co-author of The Case Against Fluoride, How Hazardous Waste Ended Up in Our Drinking Water, and the Bad Science and Powerful Politics That Keep It There, first published in 2010. He holds a BA in Natural Sciences from Cambridge University, England, and a PhD in Chemistry from Dartmouth College. Dr. Connett is retired from his full professorship at St. Lawrence University, Canton, New York, where he taught environmental chemistry and toxicology for 23 years. Both of these gentlemen will be happy to stay around after the talk. Since we're starting a little late, we'll insist they stay an extra 15 minutes, for those who want to stay. Okay, without further introduction then, Dr. Bergstahler.
Dr. Henshaw. I got to know Paul Connett many years ago, in the 1990s, and I was certainly impressed by him. We're going to start off by saying a few words about his work in the area of fluoride and toxicity and the problems of dealing with the data, and we'll start off with the little history. This H. Trenley Dean, who was the big leader in the public health service in the 1930s to figure out whether there was a way of dealing with tooth decay with the drinking water. He came up with a 21-city survey, as you see the data, showing decreased tooth decay with increasing fluoride concentration in the drinking water. Unfortunately, many of those cities were very selected and did not show the difference between high and low hardness and a number of other things. The next slide indicates how selective he was in those data, trying to say there was an inverse correlation between tooth decay and fluoride concentration in the drinking water. This was analyzed later by Rudolf Zinkelbecker in Austria, who showed that when all the data were included, not any selection, it turns out to be a wash. There's just virtually no change. When you spread all the data across, there's no really increase or decrease in tooth decay with the fluoridation. Later on, of course, we found that socioeconomic factors, nature of the water, made a big difference. The next slide, however, shows there's a direct correlation with dental fluorosis. It increases with the increasing concentration of fluoride, regardless of what's in the water, and according to the various other factors, it's a very good correlation. And with increasing dental fluorosis, a disfiguring and the mottling of the teeth with increasing fluoride concentration. Now we have in our National Institute of Dental Research data from the 1986-1987 survey, in which they looked at fluoride concentrations less than 0.3, 0.3 to 0.7, 0.7 to 1.2 and above 1.2 parts per million fluoride per liter of water. All right, first of all, the fluorosis correlation is just as we saw in the previous graph. With increasing fluoride concentration, the number of, or percentage of children with dental fluorosis goes up very monotonically, 14.6, 19.6, 25.2, 40.5%. And then the next slide shows the correlation with dental caries, on the other hand, stays just about constant. There's very little change in the amount of dental caries with increasing fluoride concentration when we take into account all of the available data. Yes, I would like to say a few words about my own work in the fluoride area. I got interested in 1965 at the University of Kansas when I found that fluoridated water was actually making me ill with a thyroid condition. That was checked out and diagnosed by my physician. And when I switched to non-fluoridated water, the thyroid condition corrected itself very promptly. I had a very low thyroid condition of -22 on a basal metabolism scale, and it went back to 0 without anything else other than this get the change to distilled water. And then I collaborated with Dr. George Walbot in the publication of this book, my colleague H. Lewis McKinney at the University of Kansas, who is a professor of history of science, Fluoridation, the Great Dilemma. We have a foreword to this by Dr. Alton Oxner of the Oxner Clinic, and I think this book pretty well summarizes the way things were at that period. My own contribution included some work on Down syndrome in relation to fluoridation, and also further studies on the cancer and the fluoride levels in wine. Following this, we had the work by Christopher Bryson looking at the economic motives behind fluoridation, the fluoride deception. And this is a very well-written book, and the second edition has an excellent preface to it. Talks about the suppression of people that tried to fight fluoridation and where it happened. In 2006, the National Academy of Sciences came up with this very powerful book, Fluoride in Drinking Water, in which they, in the scientific review of the EPA's evidence, they found that at very low levels, there was good evidence that various toxic effects were occurring, especially with the endocrine system. They drew attention to problems with brain dysfunction, IQ lowering. The whole picture that they got out of this was certainly not a very pleasant one to see, and it really, if it had been looked at carefully, should have ended fluoridation. This was a bipartisan panel. It was not all pro, but there were some anti-fluoride people on it, and that sort of balanced it. Our journal, Fluoride, was cited more than any other journal in regard to references for that review. I might say further that Dr. Connett has been the author of the book you'll be talking about, the case against fluoride. Just recently, I came back from Poland for a conference of the International Society for Fluoride Research at Szczecin. We had a very good turnout and some very powerful papers dealing with the various toxic aspects of fluoride. And I think with that, I can turn it over to Paul.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Albert. It was very thrilling for me to have Albert accept to write the introduction to our book, because he represents, in my view, continuity. Not only continuity for the opponents of fluoridation, but a continuity of scientific integrity. I never met George Walbot, but I'm absolutely convinced if I did, I would have been impressed with his integrity. His attitude was always, when he set up the International Society for Fluoride Research and published the journal Fluoride, that they would not take a position on fluoride, on fluoridation. Their job was to publish the science from either side, and they maintained that position to this very day. And I'm happy to tell you, a few years ago, the Fluoride Action Network instituted an award each year called the Albert W. Bergstahler Scientific Integrity Award, given to people that demonstrate integrity. We're not interested in propaganda. I'm not interested in propaganda. I'm not interested in spinning, massaging the data. I am interested in sharing with the public the truth as I see it. And unfortunately, the other side doesn't have the same attitude on that. They pay a lot of money to public relations outfits to spin, spin, spin. That will become apparent during my talk. So thank you, Albert, not just for being here today, but holding the torch for nearly 50 years on this issue. Thank you. As has already been mentioned, I've spent 16 years researching this issue. I didn't want it. When my wife put a bunch of papers on my desk in July the 6th, 1996, I said to her, "What is it?" She said, "Fluoridation." I said, "Take it away. These people are crazy." But she persuaded me to read these documents, and I was both shocked and embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I'd gone along with the contrived attitude that the people opposed to fluoridation were a bunch of crazies, when in fact there are many of the people opposed to fluoridation, especially the early opponents of fluoridation, were highly qualified scientists, particularly biochemists who had used fluoride to poison enzymes in their experiments. So as I read on, I got more and more shocked, and some of the results you'll see in a moment. After 14 years, I wrote a book with two other scientists, and that was a great decision on my part. If I look back and look at some of the best decisions in my life, one of them was choosing James Beck, MD, PhD from Alberta, and Spenning Nicklum, a Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford. He's a biologist, he's a physicist, I'm a chemist, and the three of us wrote this book. Why they were so important is they toned me down. I tend to be pretty in your face with these things. I don't have much tolerance for dishonesty, stupidity, and so on. But they just made it much lower key. It's understated, not overstated. Every single argument is backed up with 80 pages to the scientific references to the literature. And in my naivety, I thought it would raise the level of the debate. I thought that the proponents would be forced to come back with some kind of scientific response. But sadly, after 2 years, there has been no scientific response to this book. No critique, no response, which is absolutely typical of the promoters. They just simply ignore any evidence which suggests that practice doesn't work or that practice is harmful. This is pretty sad. But it doesn't stop them. It doesn't stop them going on a public platform and with a great deal of confidence saying fluoridation is safe and effective. In fact, they say this so many times, I think they must have a royalty, that every time they say it, $100 just chinks into their coffers. Safe and effective, that's $200. Safe and effective, that's $300, and so on. I'm only joking. So some of the key arguments against fluoridation, and I apologize because I know many of you have worked this out for yourselves. Most of these arguments are common sense, and well, my job is to validate your common sense. First of all, it's a poor medical practice to use the water supply to deliver any medicine. In fact, apart from a short experiment with iodine, before, and it didn't work, before water fluoridation, we have never used the public water supply to deliver medicine for pretty obvious reasons. One, you cannot control the dose. Once you put fluoride in the water, the dose is determined by how much water you drink, which is uncontrollable, and how much fluoride you're getting from other sources. Secondly, you can't control who gets it. It's going to go to babies, it's going to go to elderly people, it's going to go to sick people, it's going to go to people with poor nutrition, it's going to go to people with poor kidney function who cannot get rid of the fluoride, and it's going to go to people with borderline iodine deficiency, which really exacerbates fluoride's toxicity. Ask any pharmacist if there's any drug in his or her store that he can give to anybody and tell them that they can take any dose that they want. He would laugh in your face. Thirdly, something which I know upsets many people in Wichita and many other people in the United States is the violation of the individual's right to determine what medicine we put into our bodies. It's actually, yes. Keep clapping and keep that in your mind, because the American Medical Association has quite an extensive commentary on what informed consent is. And yet the American Medical Association endorses fluoridation. How dare they? They say to a doctor very clearly that you cannot force somebody to take a medication. You have to tell them what it's meant for and what the side effects are. And if they don't do that, they try to force you to take a medicine, they can be taken to court. So essentially what we're doing here is we're allowing a whole community to do to everyone what a doctor cannot do to anyone. A doctor cannot force medicine on you. And we have people dying right now in Afghanistan for freedom. And one of those freedoms is to determine what medicine that we can take in our bodies. You might expect this in a totalitarian country, but in a country that celebrates freedom, this is absolutely unacceptable. And it doesn't make it any more acceptable if your neighbor votes that you can have it in your water. If 51% of the people in Wichita vote, and the other 49% who say no have to take this thing, that doesn't make it acceptable. Fluoride is not a nutrient. Some of the promoters continue to say it's a nutrient. There's not one single process in the body which has been shown to require fluoride. It's not necessary. It's not necessary for healthy teeth or any other tissue. On the other hand, fluoride is very toxic, and it can interfere with many fundamental biological processes. It can interfere with enzymes. It can interfere with G proteins. It can interfere with many, many processes. And it's the last thing that we need in our bodies and in our water. The chemicals used to fluoridate are not pharmaceutical grade. They're not the same pharmaceutical grade chemicals that we have in toothpaste and other dental products, but they're industrial grade waste products derived from the scrubbing systems of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Now they can't take this stuff and put it into the sea by international law. And they can't dump it locally because it's too darn concentrated. But if someone buys it from them, it becomes a product. And that's how they are able to put it in our drinking water. Now, one of the contaminants, it's got a lot of contaminants in it, a lot of toxic metals, even radioactive isotopes, because the same rock that's mined for phosphate is also mined for uranium. But one of the contaminants, which is almost universally present when they measure the contaminants, is arsenic. Now, arsenic is a known human carcinogen. And according to the EPA, there is no safe level for a human carcinogen. Which according to the EPA then means that inevitably, by using these industrial grade fluoridating chemicals, you are going to increase the cancer rates in the United States. And of course, in Wichita, if you decide to put it in. This is outrageous. This is before we get to a discussion of whether fluoride itself causes cancer, and there's some evidence that it causes osteosarcoma. But just the presence of arsenic means that you are increasing the cancer rate in the United States. So why don't they use pharmaceutical grade? Well, the answer is it's too expensive. It's too expensive. And then you realize the stupidity of what we're doing, because 99.5% of the fluoride that you put in the drinking water goes nowhere near our teeth. It's used for washing the dishes, flushing the toilet, washing the car, watering the garden. So, and you can do that if you're getting rid of an industrial waste. But you can't afford to do that if you're dealing with an expensive pharmaceutical grade material. So when they tell you how cheap fluoridation is, remember it's cheap because they're getting rid of an industrial waste. And if the truth be known, the phosphate fertilizer industry would probably give it to you to get rid of it instead of paying to get it rid as a hazardous waste. I was at college with John Cleese. I played soccer with John Cleese and Monty Python. And I think I've been trapped in a series of episodes of Monty Python for the last 16 years. I mean, I can imagine, John, we've got to get rid of this hazardous waste, this awful hazardous waste. You can't dump it into the sea, John. Oh, no, we can't dump it locally. What can we do with it, John? Well, how about put it in the drinking water? Tell people it's good for their teeth. The fluoride, this was the giveaway for me 16 years ago. When I learned this fact, I knew that fluoridation was a bad idea. And that was the discovery from the literature that the level of fluoride in mother's milk is incredibly low, 0.004 parts per million. And you know what mother's milk is. It's baby's first meal. It's meant to be the ideal mixture of nutrients and minerals to facilitate that baby's first few days, few months, its development, its mental development, its physical development. And if fluoride was necessary for anything, that's where you would expect it to be. And so you now have to believe that a bunch of dentists in Chicago, the ADA, know more about what the baby needs than Mother Nature itself. And I don't believe that for 1 second. It's just an example of their enormous arrogance. Fluoride interferes with the infant's growing tooth cells. It's not as if they have a complete clean sheet here. As Albert has mentioned already, the one thing that Dean knew when he started this whole practice back in the 1940s is that fluoride would cause dental fluorosis, a mottling of the enamel, discoloration of the enamel. And the fluoridation was a trade-off. That at 1 part per million, Dean believed that you could limit the dental fluorosis to about 10 or 15% of the children whilst you were reducing tooth decay. Their attitude was that only a dentist would even know that the kid had these white specks on their teeth, and it was an acceptable trade-off. But now, according to the Center of Disease Control, 2010, 41% of American children between the ages of 12 and 15, including children in non-fluoridated areas, have some form of dental fluorosis. So they failed in this plan to reduce tooth decay whilst holding dental fluorosis to its very mild form. It's been a complete failure. 41% of American children are now being overexposed to fluoride, and there's no way that they can deny that. All they can do with Bill Mars, the former head of the Oral Health Division of the CDC, is to come in here and tell you he quite likes dental fluorosis. Well, many kids that have it do not like it, Mr. Mars. Now, according to the CDC 2005, it's also clear that Black and Mexican American children are more vulnerable to this condition. Their rates of dental fluorosis are higher than white children. So here's that report. I want to show you what dental fluorosis looks like. Here's the report from the CDC, and here you see these were the rates from 1986-87. This is the blue blocks here. That was the data that Albert actually showed you. And here the green bars are the increase that have occurred since 86-87 to 1999-2004. And you see here that 28.5% of kids have very mild dental fluorosis. Remember, they wanted to limit that to 10 to 15%. 8.6% have mild, and Dean said that mild dental fluorosis was not acceptable. That's what Dean said, the father of fluoridation. And 3.6, incredibly, have moderate or severe dental fluorosis. Now let's look at what it looks like, because these words are rather deceptive. Very mild, mild, moderate. 41% then. Let's look at it. This is very mild. Very mild ranges from white specks on the cusp of the teeth, often at the corners, up to 25% of the tooth surface. Opaque white patches. And then if you go up to mild, this impacts up to 50% of the tooth's surface, up to 50% of the teeth. And of course, it's these two teeth that are affected most. The teeth that we really want to look the best in our mouths. And if we go to moderate or severe, 100% of the tooth surface is impacted. And again, 3.6% of American children aged 12 to 15 have that condition. These are not my figures, these are their figures. And 8.6% have this condition. So, now, in order to try to fight this, the American Dental Association, on November the 9th, 2006, issued an alert to its membership, and this was to their membership what advice they should give to parents. And the advice is, if using a product that needs to be reconstituted, parents and caregivers should consider using water that has no or low levels of fluoride. Now, when we saw that come out, we thought this is really a dramatic turning point. The ADA is admitting that there's a subset of the population that shouldn't get fluoride. But they realized it too. And they've realized if this gets too much exposure, then people are going to back off water fluoridation. So they've been backpedaling ever since. In fact, when we've made efforts to get a warning in the water bills, in New Hampshire and other places, using the same verbiage, they've opposed it. So on the one hand, they tell their members, maybe for legal reasons, but on the other hand, they don't want this message to go out. I mean, I wonder how many people in Wichita were told this, have been told this by the promoters, that this is the ADA's position, that babies shouldn't get fluoride. Now, this is what Pam Den Meston said about dental fluorosis. She is one of the world's experts on the mechanism of dental fluorosis. She said in a Scientific American article, we can certainly see that fluoride impacts the way proteins interact with mineralized tissue. So what effect is it having elsewhere at the cellular level? Fluoride is very powerful, and it needs to be treated respectfully. Well, I don't think it's treating a toxic substance respectfully to put it in the drinking water and allow people to have as much as they want. So the real $65,000 question, which has been lurking there for at least 65 years, is when fluoride is causing dental fluorosis, what is it doing to the rest of the body which we cannot see? The advantage of dental fluorosis is we can see it, but we can't see bone damage, we can't see brain damage. That takes more careful study, which of course in the United States we are not doing. We are not studying children and babies to see when dental fluorosis is there, if any other condition is being caused. Now, I've been concerned for 16 years about fluoride's impact on the brain. I got involved in '96, and that was 1 year after Phyllis Mullinex had published a study on fluoride's impact on animal behavior, and just about the time that the first IQ studies were being published in fluoride coming from China. So, the baby's developing brain, it's not, the blood-brain barrier is not fully developed at birth. So fluoride can enter the brain in these first few days. And in my view, the baby should not be exposed to fluoride at 250 times the level of fluoride that occurs in mother's milk. And more or less the same thing was said by a Nobel Prize winner in 1978. Arvid Carlsson led the successful fight against fluoridation in Sweden in the 70s. And one of the reasons he gave was this: one wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. Arvid Carlsson is a neuropharmacologist. He works on chemicals which are designed to help the brain, people with neurological problems. So he knows a lot about this subject. But it's very prophetic. That was 1978, and the first animal and human studies did not come out until the 1990s. There have been over 100 animal experiments which show that fluoride can enter the brain, get stored in different parts of the brain, change biochemical factors, and cause changes in behavior. 10 animal studies show a change in behavior. Now, I'm not fond of animal experiments, but the beauty of animal experiments is you can't blame the results on some kind of psychological problems of the animal. You give the animal, you have two sets of animals, one animal gets the chemical, the other animal doesn't get the chemical. If you see a change in behavior, there's nothing else to blame it on. Now, Varner and co-workers gave rats 1 part per million fluoride in their water. That's the same level that we put in the water. For 1 year, one group got aluminium fluoride and the other group got sodium fluoride. Notice the pronunciation, please, of aluminium. It's a one-man crusade I'm having here. You Yanks get it wrong. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I mean, we've got potassium, rubidium, cesium, francium, magnesium, calcium, strontium, and all those ions, aluminum. Well, the problem was at the beginning of the 20th century, Alcoa put out a letterhead and they made a typo. And rather than waste all this paper, that typo has stuck ever since. It's, in America, it's aluminum, everywhere else, it's aluminium. But I know that makes you feel awful. Self-conscious now, you're going to be very self-conscious. I want to tell you the classic mistake that the Brits make. We call them vitamins, right? And of course they are vitamins because the word comes from vital amines. So you got one thing right. Okay. So these rats were given 1 part per million fluoride for 1 year. And that was quite a new experiment because usually these animal experiments are short. Just a few weeks. This is a long one. And they found that both groups had kidney damage, brain damage, a greater uptake of aluminium into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits, which are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. And quite shocking, nobody in America has attempted to reproduce this study, and nobody has sought fit to see if there could possibly be a relationship between Alzheimer's disease and the number of years you've lived in a fluoridated community. Like many other issues, we are flying blind from a scientific point of view. Human studies. There have now been 34 published studies, most of them from China, but a few from Iran, India, and Mexico, indicating that moderate to high fluoride exposure is associated with lowered IQ in children. And you can get a complete listing of those studies on our webpage, fluoridealert.org. Now, the study that I've always been most fond of is the study by Zhang. And Zhang invited me to go to China and have a look at the 2 villages where he did the study. One village had less than 0.7 parts per million in the well water, and the other village had between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. Now, the beauty of this epidemiology is that this area has been stable for hundreds of years. Everything's the same. The people have the same housing, the same occupation. They're mainly rural farmers. They have the same diet, they have the same lifestyles, they have the same education. Virtually everything you can think of is the same between these two communities, with the one big difference that they have different levels of fluoride in their water. But Zhang did make sure that there was no difference in the lead levels and iodine exposure, because both of those elements can also interfere with IQ, mental development, because lead lowers IQ and lack of iodine can lower IQ. But there was the same for both communities. And he found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and he found a complete shift of the IQ curve for both males and females. So here's the curve for the males, and the dark blue curve here is for the low fluoride village, and here's the high fluoride village. So the whole curve has been shifted over. And we'll see the significance of that shift a little bit later in my talk. Now, he estimated that the threshold at which, by extrapolating from all the data, the threshold at which the IQ would be lowered was at 1 part per million fluoride in the water. Now, this offers no adequate margin of safety to protect all our children drinking water 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million. That's the range that we have. And why do I say that? I say that because in this case you're looking at a group of homogeneous, genetically Chinese children. And when we extrapolate to the whole population of the United States, we have to take into account many different factors. Genetics, lifestyle, diet, medical status, and so many things. And usually, typically, for a toxic substance, we allow a factor of 10, a safety factor of 10. In other words, we determine that this dose causes harm in an experiment. So now we have to determine a dose which we are confident is safe for all the members of our population. So we take that dose that causes harm and divide by 10. Now we're confident that if we keep below that level, we won't cause any harm. That is standard procedure. And I think you can see that if 1.9 parts per million is causing harm, even now in neglecting the difference between concentration and dose, that we don't have an adequate margin of safety. But more than that, in addition to the range of sensitivity to any toxic substance, is the range of dose. And look at this. An American child drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million will get 2 milligrams a day, a dose. 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter. So if you drank 2 liters, you get 2 milligrams a day. And one of the Chinese children, if they were drinking 1 liter of water at 1.9 parts per million, they would be getting 1.9 milligrams per day. So although you could say, as the Pew Trust says, Dr. Mars says, the concentrations where you see this effect are greater than the concentrations in the water, that is to miss the point. The doses overlap. One population drinking 1.9 parts per million will have a dose which overlaps a population drinking 1 parts per million. So to continually harp on the fact that the studies which have found harm have higher concentrations that we have here in the United States is to miss the point and to fail the first lesson in toxicology, the difference between concentration and dose. Now, Harvard, a team from Harvard, Anna Choi and Philip Grandjean and 2 other Chinese researchers did a meta-analysis of 27 of these studies. The study was published in Environmental Health Perspectives. Now that's very important because the Environmental Health Perspectives is the leading environmental health journal, certainly in the United States and probably in the world. And more importantly, it's published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is a part of the National Institute of Health that promotes fluoridation. So here, under its noses, in its own journal, they are telling people that fluoride lowers IQ. That ultimately could be the end of fluoridation right there, because it's their journal. Now, 26 of those 27 studies found a lower average IQ in the high village versus the low village. In every study, they took this approach of comparing the IQ of children in the high village, high fluoride village, and a low fluoride village. So 26 out of 27 found a lowering of IQ, which is remarkably consistent. In 9 of the studies, the high fluoride village had levels of fluoride less than 3.15 parts per million. Again, the same argument as I mentioned for 1.9. There is no adequate margin of safety to protect all our children if we're seeing an effect like this at 3 parts per million. Now, Choi and co-workers found an average lowering of IQ by 0.45 or 1 standard deviation. And that equates to a drop of 7 IQ points. That is pretty serious, 7 IQ points. Now, the scientists concluded that the further investigation of fluoride's lowering of IQ in the US should be a high research priority. But the promoters have just blown this off as they blow off everything that doesn't fit into their safe and effective, $200 please, thank you. Now, one of the co-authors, Dr. Philip Kiranjin, who's very well known in the world for his work on mercury, a very famous environmental health specialist. He said, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on a population scale can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us. There are many scientists now who are very, very disturbed at the number of neurological problems our children have today, and it seems to be increasing. And nobody knows for certain what is causing these changes, but it is serious. And I want to show you how serious it is, not so much on an individual level, but on a population level. This is what we call the bell-shaped curve. Any human trait follows a normal distribution like this, which means for any human trait, you're going to expect at one end somebody to be, in this case IQ, very, very bright, and at this end very, very dull, but most people would have an average value for that trait. Okay, I'm going to shift the, let me elaborate. For IQ, above about 170, you're considered very bright or even a genius. So the area under the curve tells you how many geniuses you have in your society. Over here, less than 70, is children who are mentally handicapped, the area under the curve. Now, if I shift that curve over by 5 IQ points, I shift by 5, you don't notice a huge difference here. If you were to look at 2 children in your family or in your classroom, you'd be hard put to say that kid is 95, that kid's 100. You need a test to find out that. So it's not very noticeable, that change for the average child. But look what it does to the tails. A shift of 5 IQ points would halve the number of geniuses in your society and double the number of mentally handicapped. Not only does that have huge social ramifications, it has huge economic ramifications. And to proceed with this practice, knowing that fluoride is a candidate for such a shift, is utterly irresponsible. It's incredible to me that somebody thinks that tooth decay is more important than impairing our children's mental development. More on the IQ studies. Now, most of these studies, as I've said, are an ecological design. You're comparing one population with another. But these people did a different approach. They didn't separate the villages, they just took children drinking a range of water, quite a small range, between 0.3 and 3 parts per million, 0.24 to 2.84. And they concluded from their study that overall our study suggested that the low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence. Now, what they did was to measure the fluoride in the children's urine, because that is a measure of how much fluoride the children were ingesting each day in the urine. So it doesn't matter which village they came from. You have a measure of how much fluoride they had ingested. And they found the higher the level of fluoride in the urine, meaning the higher the exposure, the lower the IQ. So in my view, that's a stronger study than the 27 studies in the Harvard review. As the level of fluoride in the urine goes up, the IQ goes down. And the p-value for that was 0.0001. So a very significant result. So if we look at the weight of evidence here, we've got over 100 animal experiments which shows that fluoride damages animal brain. Not all at high doses. We saw one at 1 part per million. We have over 10 animal studies showing that fluoride changes animal behavior. We have 4 studies that shows that fluoride damages the fetal brain. They've looked at aborted fetuses in China, comparing the aborted fetuses in high natural levels of fluoride versus low. And 34 studies showing a lowering of IQ, and another 7 human studies showing changes in neurobehavior. That is quite a body of evidence that's accumulated. But it's being ignored by those who promote fluoridation and by those countries that practice fluoridation. So what about the so-called benefits of this practice? Now, when I started this, I assumed that the whole debate would be about health effects. And I was expecting, because fluoride is so toxic, that people would be documenting those health effects as they have done. But I assumed that it works. I assumed, like everybody else, that they weren't making this up, that fluoridation actually reduced tooth decay. But when I actually looked at the evidence, and we have 3 chapters on this, chapters 6, 7, and 8 in my book, we found that the evidence that tooth decay is actually reduced is very weak indeed. So but the question I'd like to pose at the beginning is, how much tooth decay would you have to save to justify lowering the IQ of America's children, or risking even 1 death from osteosarcoma, which I don't have time to talk about? So that's the question. And incredibly, the evidence that swallowing fluoride actually reduces tooth decay is very, very weak indeed. And let me stress, nearly every study I'm going to now talk about are their studies, not anti-fluoridation studies, pro-fluoridation studies, pro-fluoridation government studies. So let's look at the evidence together. Let's first of all compare countries. According to the World Health Organization, which collects data on tooth decay in 12-year-olds in many different countries and over at frequent intervals. And here you see tooth decay coming down from the 1960s to the present in all these countries. And on this board, 13 of these countries are not fluoridated. 1 has 10% fluoridation, that's the UK, and these countries, Austria, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, and the United States, have more than 50% of their population drinking fluoridated water. There's no difference. The tooth decay rates are coming down as fast in non-fluoridated countries as fluoridated, and if you look at the data today, the tooth decay is a wash. You can't look at those dots and say with confidence which is the fluoridated country and which is the non-fluoridated country. So let's look at the next one. Let's compare US states. Recently, a survey was done. 50 different questionnaires were administered in 50 different states, 1 questionnaire per state, to families, parents. And one of the questions on the questionnaire, in these 50 questionnaires, was, does your child have very good or excellent teeth? We're going to look at the answers that we get from each state. But I put the states here in order of the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. So this state, I believe it's Hawaii, has very little fluoridation. And over here is DC, which is 100% fluoridated. And in between, obviously, an in-between percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. Now the question that we're looking at is, does your child have very good or excellent teeth? And now the answer that we're looking at is yes, as we're looking at the yes answers. If fluoridation was a serious, significant factor, we would expect to see the answers following this trajectory, right? The fewest answers yes here, the most answers of yes there. Let's look at, first of all, families of low income. It doesn't follow that trajectory at all, does it? It's flat. It's flat. It's a bit noisy. It's a bit noisy. But you can't say that this is the highest number and this is the lowest number. If you look at high-income families, it's even more striking. There's less noise there. It hovers at 80%. Now, this are the results of 50 different questionnaires. And so there is no relationship between what parents think about the quality of their children's teeth and whether they live in a state which has a high percentage of fluoridation or a low percentage of fluoridation. But there is a relationship there, isn't there? And that's the relationship between tooth decay and income levels. Most of the tooth decay in our country is concentrated in families of low income. That is the issue, and that is what we should be tackling. Not by putting a poison in the drinking water, but by specially targeting families of low income for more care, more education, better diet. But sadly, 80% of dentists in this country will not treat children on Medicaid because there's too low a financial return. So I don't accept these crocodile tears that dentists care about poor kids, and that's why we've got to fluoridate. Having said that, there are some very good dentists out there who provide their services for free for poor kids. They set up clinics and so on. So there are some very good ones out there. So I don't want to tar them all with the same brush. Now, if we compare U.S. communities, this is a very important study. Albert quoted from this study at the beginning. This was a study conducted by the National Institute of Dental Research. They looked at 39,000 children in 84 communities. It cost the US taxpayers nearly $4 million. Big study. And John Yamianis had to get this data under the Freedom of Information Act, but he looked at decayed, missing, and filled teeth of these children aged from 5 to 17. And there are three curves here. There's children who've lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, children who live their lives, all their lives in fluoridated, and some children live part of their lives in one or the other. And you see the three curves for tooth decay completely overlap. There is no significant difference in the tooth decay between these children. Okay. But we have to say that John Yamianis was a very well-known opponent of fluoridation. So maybe, I don't think so, but maybe he cooked the data. So let's have a look at the way they handled it. What they did was not to look at DMFT, decayed, missing, and filled teeth, but to look at decayed, missing, and filled surfaces, which jacks up the sensitivity by a factor of 4 or 5. Because the teeth most teeth have 5 surfaces. The chewing teeth have 5 surfaces. The top 6 cutting teeth and bottom 6 cutting teeth only have 4 surfaces. They don't count the cutting edge. So between 4 and 5 surfaces per tooth. And overall, when all the teeth come out in a child's mouth, there's 128 tooth surfaces. So what was the difference between children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces, and children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, non-fluoridated community, 3.4. So the difference was 0.6 of 1 tooth surface. So think back to the lowering of IQ. We are prepared, apparently, to risk lowering the IQ of our children in order to save, on average, 0.6 of one tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. Less than 1% of the tooth surfaces in their mouth. But it gets worse. The authors did not show that that 0.6 of a tooth surface difference was statistically significant. Now that's a little unusual when you think about it. This is a big government-funded study, and to report the results without a statistical analysis? This is weird stuff. And this year, Kathleen Thiessen, one of the authors of the National Research Council report that did the chapter on endocrine disruption, she did the statistical analysis and she found that this result was not statistically significant. So do you hear what I said about the evidence is very, very weak? This is their biggest and best study. It's their study, not our study. And they find a difference which is remarkably small, and when you do the analysis, it's not statistically significant. Meanwhile, in Australia, they're finding less differences. In 2 states in Australia, between 0.12 and 0.3 of one permanent tooth surface. And in South Australia, they found no statistically significant difference in tooth decay between kids who drank fluoridated water all their lives and tank water, i.e. rainwater or bottled water. This is a review from Ontario, from a pro-fluoridation dentist, David Locke. He says the magnitude of fluoride's effect, i.e. its benefit, is not large in absolute terms, I agree, is often not statistically significant, we've seen that, and may not be of clinical significance. Now, does that sound to you like the kind of evidence that we would use to push this on people, violate their right to informed consent to medication? This is, again, Monty Python. An important recent study, again, this is a US-funded study, the famous Iowa study. They did something that nobody else has done. They looked at how much fluoride the kid was swallowing each day. How much fluoride they were getting from toothpaste, swallowing, how much fluoride they're getting from food, how much fluoride they were getting from water, added it all up, and looked at tooth decay to see if there was a relationship between the amount of fluoride that the kid swallowed and tooth decay. No relationship. No relationship between the amount of fluoride that's swallowed and tooth decay. So how do you explain these two different worlds? This world over here, from all those white coats, all those professional bodies, telling you that fluoridation is the best thing since sliced bread. This is the amazing way of fighting tooth decay, especially low-income families. We've got to do it. Keep up with the times, Wichita. And over here, when you look at the science, there's practically no science which says that it actually reduces tooth decay. And if it doesn't reduce tooth decay, why are we doing it? Why are we putting a hazardous waste in the drinking water? Okay, now there is a reason. There is a reason. And they gave it to us in 1999. Before I get to that. Modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when fluoridation is stopped. So in these countries, in former East Germany, when the two Germanys got together, they stopped fluoridation in East Germany. Tooth decay didn't go up. In Cuba, when they stopped in a village, a community called Saluda, when they stopped, it didn't go up. In Canada, in British Columbia, when they stopped fluoridation, it didn't go up. In Finland, in one community, when they stopped, it didn't go up. So, why? Well, even fluoridation promoters now concede that fluoride's beneficial action is predominantly topical, not systemic. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. And let's see the exact quote from the CDC. Let's take a bit of time, but I think it's worth reading it. Fluoride carries preventive properties. Initially were attributed to changes in enamel during tooth development. because of the association between fluoride and cosmetic changes in the enamel, and a belief that fluoride incorporated into enamel during tooth development would result in a more acid-resistant material. However, laboratory and epidemiologic research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical for both adults and children. So listen, what we're seeing here is, whoops, we got the mechanism wrong for 50 years. For 50 years, pediatricians had been giving fluoride drops to pregnant women, and tablets, or the other way around, tablets to pregnant women, drops to babies, before their teeth had erupted, in order to jack up the fluoride in the enamel, so when the teeth finally erupted, they would be more resistant to acid attack produced by bacteria. Whoops, we were wrong. It works topically. It works after the teeth have erupted into the oral cavity. Now, fluoridation should have ended with that statement. Because if it works topically, why on earth expose every tissue, including the brain, to a toxic substance when you can deliver it directly to the teeth and spit it out with fluoridated toothpaste? So not only do you avoid exposing all your tissues to this toxic substance, you also avoid exposing people that don't want it in their water. So you solve the medical problem and the ethical problem simply by changing the delivery system from the water to toothpaste. And if people are too poor to buy toothpaste, that's where you should spend your money. And I personally would add one more thing, and Wichita has some experience here. Rather than give them fluoridated toothpaste, I suggest xylitol toothpaste, xylitol mints, or chewing gum. As Dorothy is in the audience here, she worked with the late June Allen, who did work in primary schools in Wichita, in which kids were given two doses of xylitol a day. One, a piece of chewing gum, two, a mint. And this program seems to have been fairly successful. And it's been used in Finland, Scandinavia, Japan for years. But going back to this topical thing, this is what Arvid Carlson said. In our pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it's awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there, they're available for you. Why drink the stuff? Why, indeed? He's only a Nobel Prize winner. The science underpinning the promoter's claims of safety and effectiveness is extremely poor. We've already seen part of it. Example of bad science. I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but knowing that, have I mentioned this already? 15% of kids have dental fluorosis if they're getting the optimal level of fluoride. So the scientific thing to do would be to do a survey in Wichita to see what the prevalence of dental fluorosis is right now. If it's over 15%, then your kids are already getting more fluoride than they should be getting. They don't need any more. That would be the scientific thing to do, wouldn't it? If you know that optimal fluoride exposure in a population is associated with 10 to 15% very mild dental fluorosis, that's their theory, not mine, then see what the prevalence is before you put in more. Scientific, logical, rational. Unfortunately, those are not attributes of your average fluoridation promoter. I've been through that, I've just said all of that. Instead of science, promoters use endorsements. Here's the typical list of professional bodies that endorse fluoridation, so we're told by the ADA. But the ADA says all these organizations endorse fluoridation, but the question is, how many of them have researched the issue for themselves? How many are doing original research or just reviewing the literature, and how many are just playing follow my leader? Well, we know they played follow my leader. When the US government, US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation in 1950, by 1952, the American Dental Association, the American Medical Association, the American Public Health Association, and many of these organizations endorsed fluoridation, simply by virtue of the fact the US government had endorsed fluoridation. Now, endorsements are a good way to sell shoes, but not a good way to determine public health policy. And I would also ask you, these endorsements, whilst they may have worked in America and a handful of other countries, clearly didn't work with the vast majority of countries in the world that do not fluoridate their water, including 97% of Europe. So all these arguments, which they think are so convincing, did not convince the professional bodies in all these countries in Europe. Incidentally, they say, oh, well, these countries deliver fluoride in other ways. They have fluoridated salt. Oh, yes. Only 4 of these countries have fluoridated salt: Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland. The majority of European countries have no fluoridation of the water and no fluoridation of their salt, and remember, there's no difference in tooth decay. And as far as Wichita being the odd man out in the United States for not fluoridating its water, for having the temerity to twice vote against it, look at the company that you keep. Look at some of the cities, some of the famous cities that do not fluoridate their water. Amsterdam, Athens, Belgrade, Berlin, Bologna, Bonn, Brussels, Cambridge, Cardiff, Copenhagen, Edinburgh, Florence, Frankfurt, Genoa, The Hague, Helsinki, and so on, and so on, and so on. I could go on for ages, pulling out all those cities in the world, those famous cities, those cultural cities, those cities with famous universities that have not fluoridated their water. Are they all stupid? Are they all backwards? What does the Wichita Eagle say about that? Now, let's be clear here. I have no problem with the Wichita Eagle having an editorial position which is pro-fluoridation. That is their prerogative. I do have a problem with the Wichita Eagle running on its front page something which is supposed to be news, which is no more than an editorial for fluoridation. That is unprofessional. And it is very, very sad that many of these people that work for the Wichita Eagle were trained at an institute. What is it called, Albert? No, the Alan White. The William Allen White School of Journalism has a huge reputation, and to see this professionalism dragged in the mud by the Wichita Eagle for whatever reasons is absolutely disgusting. They should be ashamed of themselves. Fluoridation promoters have done their best to downplay or completely ignore a key report by the National Research Council. This is the report, Fluoride in Drinking Water, a Scientific Review of EPA's Standards. Here it is, Albert referred to it. Now, this report involved a panel of 12 experts for the first time in the history of fluoridation in the United States. They used a balanced panel. They had 3 people that were against fluoridation, 3 that were definitely pro-fluoridation, and 6 who hadn't declared position. They expected to take a year writing this report, and it actually took them 3.5 years. I was the only anti-fluoridation scientist who was invited to give personal testimony to them. I spoke for 45 minutes before them. I'm happy to say that much of what I said is actually considered in their report. And I gave my 45 minutes presentation immediately after William Mars from the Oral Health Division, who came to your town. Now I have a bone to pick with Dr. Mars. Dr. Mars was invited to debate me when I came on this thing, and he refused. He said that I was a brilliant debater. Well, thank you very much. But he then went on to say that I was the leading the leader of misinformation on fluoridation. Now, he has a responsibility. If he believes that I am a leading champion of misinformation, number one, he doesn't have to be a good debater to prevail. He just has to come on a public platform with me there and point out all that misinformation that I'm supposed to have given. Now, he could start by telling us what was the misinformation I gave to the National Research Council in that 45-minute presentation, which he heard personally. What is the misinformation I have with my two colleagues in the book, The Case Against Fluoride? What is the misinformation I have on our webpage, the Fluoride Action Network, and especially the health database? If there's misinformation there, we need to know about it. We need to correct it. I don't want to go around misinforming people. But I think it's the height of arrogance to, on the one hand, refuse to publicly debate an issue for which he has been a champion. He should be prepared to debate anybody of any background, and at the same time have the audacity to insult me. So, going back to this NRC report, in this report, they outline the damages that fluoride causes teeth. They indicate that severe dental fluorosis actually increases tooth decay. They indicated that fluoride damages the bone. They weren't clear about at what dose that fluoride damages the bone. They indicated that a whole chapter on fluoride's interaction with the brain. I was very happy to see that. They indicated that fluoride interferes with the endocrine system, the thyroid gland, accumulates in the pineal gland, and that fluoride may cause osteosarcoma. Here are some quotes from that report. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Several lines of information indicate an effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. All members of the committee agreed that there is scientific evidence that under certain conditions, fluoride can weaken bone and increase the risk of fractures. And now I want to turn more to the politics here, because on the day the NRC report was released, the ADA declared that it was irrelevant to water fluoridation, erroneously claiming that the NRC panel only looked at effects at 4 parts per million. That's not true, but that's what they claimed. On the very day it was published, they didn't have time to read it, let alone consider it and look at the references. And 6 days later, Tweedledum, the Oral Health Division of the CDC, declared the findings of the NRC report are consistent with CDC's assessment that water is safe and healthy at the levels used for water fluoridation. Now, what there should have been up there on flashing neon lights in Chicago and Atlanta, Georgia, was a statement to the effect that the top personnel of the ADA and CDC cannot read. Because if they had struggled through to Chapter 2, they would have found that Chapter 2 was an exposure analysis in which the authors found that certain subsets of the population were already exceeding the EPA safe reference dose, drinking water at 1 part per million. Now tell me it's not relevant to water fluoridation. Incredible. The NRC panel concluded that the EPA's maximum contaminant level, the safe drinking water standard of 4 parts per million, was not protective of health and should be lowered. They recommended that the EPA do a risk assessment to establish a new MCLG, and after 6 years, they haven't completed that task. It took them 5 years to even start it. They commissioned this report. They asked the National Academy of Sciences to do this report. They come back and said, lower the safe drinking water standard, do a risk assessment, and they're dragging their feet for political reasons, I might say. So the reason that they're not doing this, or being very slow about it, is that if you use basic toxicological assumptions and methodology, you would find that there is no adequate margin of safety to protect all our citizens from the documented endpoints, health effects in this report. For example, at 1 part per million, you have an increased uptake of aluminum into the brain, dental fluorosis impacting 41% of American children, 3.6% of severe dental fluorosis, moderate or severe, increased cortical bone defects in children, osteosarcoma in young men, the studies are mixed. At 1.5 parts per million, a doubling of hip fractures in the elderly in a Chinese study. Not statistically significant, but clearly part of a trend, which makes it a real finding. At 1.9 parts per million, lowering of IQ, 2.3 parts per million, a lowering of thyroid activity in the Ukraine, and at 3 parts per million, lowering of fertility rates in the United States. None of those endpoints provide an adequate margin of safety to protect the whole population. Promotion of fluoridation is not scientific. The ADA does not behave scientifically. Take some kind of tranquilizer, because we're just about to enter another episode of Monty Python. Monty Python, ADA style. This is their advice to their membership. Individual dentists must be convinced that they need not be familiar with scientific reports of laboratory and field investigations on fluoridation to be effective participants in the promotion program, and that non-participation is an overt neglect of professional responsibility. Give me a break. Can you imagine any other profession saying to its membership, you don't have to be on top of the science of your subject to go out and promote some project, and if you don't promote it, you're neglecting your professional responsibility? This is Alice in Wonderland. This is Kafka. It's Monty Python. The CDC is hopelessly biased on fluoridation, as are all the state health departments that they control. Most citizens believe when the CDC is cited that they are hearing from the 20,000 strong federal agency in Atlanta, Georgia. Actually, they're hearing from a very small subset of that, the Oral Health Division, which comprises of about 30 people, and they're all dentally trained. They don't have any expertise on specialized areas of medicine or toxicology. The CDC, the Oral Health Division, aggressively promotes fluoridation throughout the United States. They will even send their personnel to support mandatory fluoridation on a statewide basis. So you might see them come back to Kansas. If you beat it here in Wichita, they're almost certainly trying to get mandatory fluoridation on a statewide basis, so they don't have to go through these pesky battles, one community at a time. But there are no personnel at the CDC who are assigned to oversee the safety of fluoridation. So you've got one entity that promotes it, and no other entity not using their experts to actually follow the health effects. The most frequently cited endorsement is from the CDC. I'm sure you've all heard this. I'll read it to you one more time. Fluoridation is one of the 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. I would actually slightly change this. People who cite this endorsement is one of the most embarrassing things to do in the 21st century, if you know the circumstances. Well, here are the circumstances. The report was based upon, the report on which the statement was based was not externally peer-reviewed. The Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report is an in-house journal of the Center of Disease Control. It is not externally peer-reviewed. It was written by two people, Scott Tomar, a dentist who had not written anything on fluoridation before, and Susan Griffin, an economist. Now, okay, I don't hold that against it. There are many citizens out there that have been able to master this subject without having any significant qualifications. And in fact, I think today there are more citizens who know more about this issue than most of the medical and dental professionals in this country. But anyway, so I'm not going to assume that just because they are not qualified that this statement is somehow lousy. But the content gives it away. The report is 6 years out of date on the health data. They're telling the world this is one of the top 10 health achievements, and yet the only citation they give for the safety of fluoridation is a report by the National Research Council in 1993, and they're publishing this in 1999, so they're 6 years out of date on the health. That's embarrassing for a government agency. And their evidence of benefit was laughable. And good that you can join in the laughter because you know more than they do about this issue, okay? So get ready to laugh because they only have one figure in this report and they show tooth decay in 12-year-olds measured as DMFT coming down from the 60s to the present. Does that sound familiar? And on the same graph, this red line is the percentage of the US population drinking fluoridated water. Voila! The blue line is coming down because the red line is going up. But wait a moment. There are other red lines we could have drawn. The sale of telephone directories, of bicycles, and all kinds of things were going up in that same period in the United States. Were they all related to the decline of tooth decay? But surely, being researchers at the CDC, they would have double-checked to see what was happening in other countries, because after all, the World Health Organization is tracking the very same data that they plotted. In fact, this red line here is their line that you've just seen. And in the case of most of these other lines, there is no fluoridation. So either this is an example of total incompetence, that they didn't know the World Health Organization had this data, or if they did know that this data was out, then it was a clear case of deception. Now the zero is, that in my view, the CDC's Oral Health Division is merely a mouthpiece for the American Dental Association. Whatever the ADA says today, you can expect the CDC to say tomorrow. They're a bunch of dentists, they're all dentists, they all love teeth. In fact, I have a cartoon which has how a dentist sees a person. It's a great big mouth with two little legs on it. They're just preoccupied with one tissue. It's fine, I mean, teeth are important, but don't tell me that teeth are more important than brains, kidneys, bones, and other things. Now, the ADA and the CDC have been joined by the mighty Pew Charitable Trust, who've thrown their mighty budget behind promoting fluoridation. And it's not a coincidence that Dr. William Mars, former head of the CDC's Oral Health Division, was loaned to Pew. Now I'm wondering whether he was receiving two salaries. Was he receiving a taxpayer's salary whilst he was still at the CDC, and whatever remuneration he's getting for propagandizing on behalf of fluoridation? I don't know. But look at the way Pew handled the Harvard meta-analysis. Remember that choice study? Okay, I'm going to go through 4 points that Pew made. Pew said, in many cases, the high fluoride areas were significantly higher than the levels used to fluoridate public water systems. This is the IQ study, Harvard study. In fact, the high fluoride areas in these foreign countries were reached levels as high as 11.5 parts per million, which is more than 10 times higher than the optimal level used in the United States. Now, I put to you that that is slick propaganda, because I'm going to show you now the figures from these villages. I want you to count how many of these numbers are less than 3 parts per million. So here are the studies, 4.5, and also see how many are at 11.5. 4.5, 0.88, 2.1 to 7.6, 1.8, 2.97, 1.81 to 2.69, more than 1 to 8.6, 2 to 11, 3.15, 2.9, 2.97, 0.57 to 4.5, 2.5, 1.66 to 9.42, 1.14 to 6.09, 3.8 to 11.5, there it is, and 2.38. If you count, how many were less than 3.15? 9. Do you think it's fair to characterize that by pulling out the highest number of 11.5 and making a meal of that? Let's look at it again. In fact, the high fluoride areas in these foreign countries reach levels as high as 11.5, which is more than 10 times higher than the optimal level used in the United States. So they've taken a number, actually from two studies. One went up to 11, one went up to 11.5. But the large number were very close to what we should be concerned about. So I think that is an example of misleading the public. And they are a famous entity. They pride themselves on their independent analysis of scientific issues. Independent analysis, my foot. Let's look at some more. So in 9 of the 27 studies, the high fluoride village had levels of fluoride less than 3.15. There, as I said, I think they mischaracterized the situation here. And as I mentioned before, Zhang estimated the lowering of IQ at 1.9 parts per million. And that is very relevant to the United States. Pugh's second point. Although the studies compared high fluoride with low fluoride areas, the authors acknowledged that the actual exposures of the individual children are not known. Well, I'm not sure if that's, we can blame the authors or Pugh, but the fact is that 11 of the 27 studies measured fluoride in the children's urine, which is an individual measure, and Ding, etc., which paper was cited by the authors, did measure fluoride in the urine and produce that correlation. So that is, again, misinformation to the public. It also, you can relate the lowering of IQ to fluoride levels in the serum. The studies found very little difference in IQ scores between children in the high fluoride and low fluoride groups. Very little difference in IQ scores. Now, the problem here is that Pugh misrepresented the Choi analysis. They confused the average standardized mean difference of 0.45 with a drop in the IQ scores. This standard standardized mean difference of 0.5 equates to a drop of 7 IQ points, and 7 IQ points is not small. So again, the Pew has screwed that up, and I've shown you the population significance of that. And then they also said, the Pew said, a 2009 animal study found that even at fluoride levels that were up to 230 times higher than the typical human consumes, there was no evidence of learning deficits in any of the fluoride-exposed groups. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute classic case of cherry-picking the literature. There have been over 100 animal studies indicating that fluoride can enter the brain, change the biochemistry, change animal behavior. And Pew has chosen one of the very few studies that have been done on animal brain and not found anything. That is called cherry picking. And if we did that, they would hammer us for doing that. But they are the famous Pew Charitable Trust. So I believe that health agencies in fluoridated countries seem more interested in protecting this practice than protecting the health of their citizens. This is what John Dewar said, by the way. He was the chairman of the NRC report. What the committee found is that we've gone with the status quo regarding fluoride for many years, and for too long really, and now we need to take a fresh look. In the scientific community, people tend to think this is settled. I mean, when the US Surgeon General comes out and says this is one of the top 10 greatest achievements of the 20th century, that's a hard hurdle to get over. But when we looked at the studies that have been done, we found that many of these questions are unsettled, and we have much less information than we should, considering how long this fluoridation has been going on. Key health studies have not been done in this country. There's been no investigation for a possible relationship between fluoridation, lowered IQ in children, except for one small study in New Zealand, behavioral changes in children, arthritic symptoms in adults, hypothyroidism in adults, increased bone fractures in children, melatonin levels in children, earlier onsets of puberty, Alzheimer's disease in adults, and no attempt to put on a formal scientific basis the many anecdotal reports that people are sensitive to fluoride, like Albert here. It's been documented by Bruce Spittle in the book Fluoride Fatigue. Now, if you don't look, you don't find. And the notion that the absence of studies is the same as the absence of harm is ridiculous. But how often have you heard, even in these last few weeks, well, we've been doing this for 65 years and I don't see any problems. Well, you're not going to see any problems unless you do a study. Are you going to walk down the street and say, oh, I can see that IQ has just been lowered by 3 points across the whole population? I saw that today when I was walking down the street. No, you have to do studies. You have to do science. Now, I give you an example. Again, this is the last episode of Monty Python for tonight. Dr. Peter Cooney, the Chief Dental Officer of Canada, told an audience in Dryden, Ontario, April the 1st, 2007. Actually, maybe in 8. I was there. It was videotaped, so this is a very accurate transcription. He said, I've walked down your high street today, and I didn't see anyone growing horns. And you've been fluoridated for 40 years. So now we know how Health Canada does science. They have all these specialists. They have these horn specialists. They have cow horn specialists, bull horn specialists, moose horn specialists, deer horn specialists, and they go around Canada looking to see if anybody is growing horns. And as long as they don't find any horns growing, they know that fluoridation is perfectly safe. So, in summary, I've got to the end here, 10 arguments. Fluoridation is not a nutrient and it's not necessary for healthy teeth. The level used, 1 part per million, is not small, it's 250 times the level in mother's milk. Fluoridation is very poor medical practice. You can't control the dose or who gets it. It's a violation of the individual's right to informed consent to medication, a fundamental freedom in my view. Fluoride does not work systemically, so why swallow it and why put it in the water? The evidence of benefit is very weak. Dental fluorosis rates show that American kids are being grossly overexposed to fluoride. There are many other health concerns, not least of which is the IQ. There is not an adequate margin of safety to protect everyone from the endpoints reported by the National Research Council, and the promotion of fluoridation is not scientific. Please watch the 29-minute videotape called Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation. If you've got a child less than 12 years of age, they can show you how to download it, make your own copies, and you can make as many as you want, and you can circulate it. And resources, fluoridealert.org is our webpage. There's an absolute mountain of information. You know, I always hope that one of my 3 children would grow up one day and help us with either of our issues, waste or fluoride. I've been on waste for 27 years. Well, one of them did grow up. They all grew up, but one of them grew up. And one day, about 10 years ago, he came to us and said, Mum and Dad, I'd like to help you with the fluoridation campaign. We were just staggered. He said, well, that's great. What do you want to do? He said, I'd like to develop a web page for you. And that's why we have it. And before he went to law school, he also made that videotape, Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation. So I always hoped that one of our kids would help us, but I had no idea that one of our kids would be better than us at everything and would direct us. And he's now got re-involved after graduating from law school and working for a law judge. He's got it hooked back in to water fluoridation. It's just completely revamped the web page. Anyway, on the web page you can 10 facts on fluoride, 50 reasons to oppose fluoridation, a health effects database. But you've got some excellent literature here. I applaud all the different groups here that put together and put out this wonderful literature. It's some of the best I've seen in any of community fighting fluoridation. Make sure, you all wear these buttons with pride and keep them. This is going to be an heirloom to show your kids what you did in 2012 to protect their future. We have to end water fluoridation, one open mind at a time and one community at a time. And you're important for us. And you're not just doing this for Wichita. Because if they can use these tactics here, use an enormous amount of money, use public relations outfits, spin, deception, the Pew Trust, and all the rest of them, they're going to use this formula to get every other town fluoridated in the United States. So a victory here would really help all of us. Since October 25th, fluoridation meant its Waterloo. On October the 25th, 2010, Waterloo, Ontario voted fluoridation out, and that began a snowball effect. Since then, over 70 communities have stopped fluoridation in Canada, the United States, and New Zealand. Yeah. I believe it's a straight race between Canada and New Zealand as to which of these former British colonies will be the first to stop fluoridation nationwide. The United States will probably be next to last. The last one will be the most arrogant country that I have ever visited, or a country with the most arrogant government that I've ever visited, namely Australia. They will be the absolute last. Maybe Ireland will also be last. They're not so arrogant, they're just so darn slippery. Anyway, so there's about 3 million people have been liberated from forced fluoridation since October the 25th, 2010. And you can see a listing on our webpage. The fluoridation promoters are desperately trying to reverse this trend. And that is why they are throwing so much money at PR in cities like Portland and Wichita. They're trying to reverse this trend, that all across the world, people with access to internet are finally getting the truth on fluoridation, and they don't want it. They don't have the science to combat us, but they do have the power, and they're not embarrassed to use it. So I urge you all to encourage all your friends, neighbors and colleagues to vote no on November 6th. Please, just listen to me carefully. I've lived in a town that was fluoridated. It took us 7.5 years to get it out of Canton, New York. In that time, we had to buy 5-gallon jugs of water, and we put it on a cooling tower, and we used that water to drink and to cook. But my wife was still upset that she was watering her garden with fluoridated water. She's a keen organic gardener. We were also upset that we were having to bathe and shower in this water. We were also upset that when we went downtown, every meal that we had downtown, the water that we drank, the food that we ate, was all fluoridated. And when I went to work, every cup of coffee, every glass of water was fluoridated. When we went to a town's house, a friend's house, it was fluoridated. There is no filter that can protect you from all of this insidious fluoride in your lives. And I've been going to very nice, generous people have been feeding me over the last few days, and going into these restaurants. I remember what it was like when we finally got fluoride out of the water, and we could drink the water in a restaurant again without thinking about it. We could drink the coffee again. We could have the soup again. You've got that luxury at the moment. And you've got 6 days to hold on to it. So please, I beg you, do everything you can. Get your friends, get your relatives, get your colleagues to just open their minds to this. You've got the leaflets, you've got this PowerPoint. I hopefully can be put up on a web page. Can you put it up on your web page? Yes, it's going to be on a web page. So, and their videotapes are being made throughout the trip. So, thank you all so much for coming and listening so patiently. It's gone on longer than you should have done. Thank you for listening, but we do have time for a few questions. So, yes.
Showing my ignorance here.
That's okay.
But is there in production any home water filtration system that can lower the levels?
Yes, there are, but it's not the cheap system. The activated charcoal filters, the Brita filters, do not remove fluoride. So there are three systems that do remove fluoride. One is distillation. You can get table distillation kits to distill the water. But make sure if you drink distilled water that you replace the ions, the metal ions, that you're not getting in tap water with some kind of nutrients from your health store. Secondly, the reverse osmosis is the one that most people cite, but they're not uniform, so you need to get your water tested after you purchase the equipment. Get an agreement from the company that sells you the reverse osmosis that it will get down to a certain level. Spend $25 or whatever to get it tested, and if it's higher than they say, get your money back. The system that I particularly like is mixed ion exchange, where you have a cation exchange and an anion exchange resins. You don't need to know the technology here. But that produces pure water. It does it very quickly, and you can tell instantly when it's used up, because the conductivity of the water, as soon as ions flow through that are not being removed, goes shooting up. So I would look into that.
You got that on your website?
No, we don't. We're not in the business of advertising or selling anything. So I'm reluctant to mention companies or anything like that. But what I can do, if you have no joy, look up ion exchange, removal of fluoride. Ion exchange, removal of fluoride.
Lots of information here on last night.
You did? You found it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So talk to the lady behind you, because she went through this last night. Next one? Yes.
Well, again, thank you for being here, but I tried to promote this lecture series at Wichita State University. I had my posters ripped down, 3 out of 4 of them in the health professions. I was snubbed when I tried to reserve a lecture hall, so we had to do an in-play around them to actually secure that for last night. The anthropology department had to actually reserve, not the chemistry department, not the health professions, and of course the French department assisted in reserving the room. What would you say in a letter to the dean of the health professions and these other biology departments and chemistry departments and others to apologize for this type of behavior in an academic setting?
Well, I think it's disgraceful. I think it's disgraceful. It dishonors all the people that have struggled so hard to raise the level of education in this country, especially at the university level. And you've heard me say this, but I think it's worth saying again, just in case there's a single person left in Wichita that hasn't heard it. My Latin teacher said to our class when I was about 12, he said, the best definition of an educated person I've heard is that an educated person is someone who can entertain his or herself, entertain a friend, and entertain a new idea. Now it's that last point, isn't it, which is so important. The notion of an open mind that is willing to entertain new ideas, different ideas. And that tells you, if that definition is correct, it means that people with high degrees, big titles, are not actually educated. And people that have never been near a university are in fact educated. And I think that this is tragic, this for an academic entity to behave this way. You know, Einstein said that he believed there was only one law that could not be challenged, and that was the second law of thermodynamics. He didn't think that would ever be overturned. He thought all other laws were up for grabs. And somebody else said, an ugly fact can overturn a beautiful theory. You have to entertain the notion that you could be wrong. But for some reason, nearly 50 years ago, they decided that there was no question that fluoridation was safe, and it would always be safe. There would be no evidence to overthrow this. And this is dangerous. When you put a fence around a theory, or you put a fence around a policy and make it a no-go area, when you get to the point of harassing professionals because they have a different point of view, or sacking them, as the case of Phyllis Mullinex, when she found that fluoride changed animal behavior, she was sacked from the Forsyth Dental Center. When William Marcus of the Water Division of the EPA raised questions about the doctoring of a cancer study on fluoride, he was fired. I mean, quite frankly, think about it for a moment. You don't have to do this if the thing was good. You don't have to behave this way if fluoridation was as good as they said it was. If fluoridation did what it did, reduced tooth decay efficiently, effectively, and did not have any harmful effects, then they don't have to behave this way. You only have to behave this way harassing, preventing people having talks or meetings, refusing to debate. You only have to do that when what you're defending is rotten. That's the behavior of people defending bankrupt, rotten ideas. And we have to fight it tooth and nail. I mean, this is serious. For me, the seriousness of this, when I'm a scientist, I'm also an activist, but I make damn sure that my activism is tempered by integrity. I don't lie, I don't massage. When a scientist does not tell the truth, science is gone. Science depends upon the truth. And if you separate science from truth, you don't have science anymore. And if you don't have honest science, then your public health policy is going to be lousy. And this is serious. When we have government agencies deliberately distorting the truth and trying to keep this practice going, come high or high water, it is serious. It is serious for all the other things. Because ultimately, many things in public health depend upon trust. And if we lose that trust, God help us. If the American people lose trust in all those bureaucracies which are there to protect us, or supposed to be there to protect us in countless ways, this country is going to go down and down and down. And so it's a slippery slope we're on here. A slippery slope. And if there's one thing I should be telling the children I'm going to be speaking to at the Wichita, what's it, Academy, the Institute, wherever it is. One thing, always tell the truth. And the moment you work for an entity that requires you not to tell the truth, which wants you to lie, that's the time that you resign. Get out. But, yeah. Yes?
Well, how do we, with the dentist being brainwashed, how do we convince the dentist to get more on our side? Do we have any dentists on our side?
Yes, we do. We have very prominent dentists on our side. We have, first of all, John Cahoon, the former Chief Dental Officer of Auckland, an avid promoter of fluoridation, did a world study, tour, came back, changed his mind, and worked for the rest of his life trying to stop it. We have Dr. David Kennedy in San Diego, as a prominent dentist, former president of the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, which as a body is opposed to fluoridation. So that's 500 or 600 dentists right there. We need to have doctors.
Those people go out and try to talk to the other dentists?
So some of them do. Yes, David Kennedy does. Dr. Hardy Lieback, former president of the Canadian Association of Dental Research, did the same thing. Pro-fluoridation, changed his position. We have over 4,000 professionals that are calling for an end to water fluoridation. The other sad piece of news is that dentists behind the scenes, and they've already, people here have experienced this, have told us behind the scenes that they're opposed to fluoridation, but they don't dare come out and say this in public because they're worried about the pressure from their peers and possibly reprisals. Again, that's sick. No profession should do that. No profession should intimidate its members to toe the party line. That's unacceptable. Yes?
Do we know of any dentists here in Wichita that are opposed?
So any dentists in Wichita that are against fluoridation, is that what you are?
We have one.
Yes, we have one.
You have a pathologist right here.
We've got a pathologist.
There's only 30% of the dentists in town that have signed on. The other 60% have not.
Yeah. Look, don't, for the average dentist and doctor, they only get one side of this at med school, at dental school. And when they practice, they're so busy treating their patients, they don't have time to do what the three of us who wrote that book, which is not on view, but the three of us who wrote that book, we're all retired professors. We had all the time in the world to read the literature. So they don't. So the problem is that they just take the word of the ADA or the AMA at face value. That's the problem. That they're not, and that's fine too. I mean, they do that for a lot of things. But what I find problematic is when somebody has not read the primary literature, goes on a public platform with their white coat on and says, fluoridation is safe and effective, when what they're doing is passing on second-hand information, and it's not their professional skills that are being played here, but their loyalties. There's something completely different. Anybody else? Yes?
You kind of touched on it. I was just wondering about the effects of fluoride on the environment, like watering plants and animals, and if it washes into the river, and if there's any study on that.
Ultimately, in this case, the answer to pollution is dilution. When the fluoridated water from the water treatment plant goes, the sewer goes into the river, it won't have had much fluoride removed, but it's going to enter at about 1 part per million, and very quickly, in a swiftly flowing river, it's going to be down to a much greater dilution. You have to be concerned about if it's a still body of water or a lake or something where you don't have outflow, then you could get an increase in concentration with evaporation. There was something that was published in the literature just a few weeks ago, and that was that there are certain toads that in fluoridated water have severe problems. They get bone fractures. And an article in the journal Fluoride is going to be covering that, right? The next issue? The fluoride and the toads. Toads.
Oh, the frogs.
The frogs. Frogs, sorry.
It was causing the skeletal fluorosis in the frogs until they looked and saw it was definitely skeletal fluorosis. They could not understand where it was coming from. And then they checked it out and proved that it definitely was. So there's an environmental problem that they didn't even realize in New Zealand.
Yeah, and Albert talks about the chinchillas being sensitive to fluoride, crocodiles being sensitive to fluoride, and dogs. Dogs are one of the most sensitive species to osteosarcoma. So how much of that osteosarcoma in dogs is due not necessarily fluoridated water, but to the high levels of fluoride in bone meal. Bone is where the fluoride concentrates. So if you take in the bone meal and make animal feed out of it, then you're giving that animal a lot of fluoride, and that's going to concentrate in the bone. There's a very disturbing videotape made by Kathy Justice out of Colorado, Pagosa Springs, Colorado. She lost 6 horses to fluoride. They loved these horses. They treated these horses so well. And apparently these horses, the water was fluoridated. The horses were drinking this fluoridated water. It ruined them. This is all documented. And they even had a veterinarian from Cornell University, Lennart Crook, who was the world's leading expert on fluoride's impact on animals, go to her farm and confirm that these horses had fluorosis. It was fluoride poisoning. So yes, there is concern about certain animal and species and fluoride. Yes?
Is it possible, if you are affected by fluoride therapy, which I am, hypothyroidism and I'm ready to break my gums out and stuff, my dentist made me quit using it quite some time ago, as did my endocrinologist. Can you get it out of your system? I have a reverse osmosis.
You get it. Okay. Some people talk about various things to remove fluoride from the system. I'm not. I don't have any experience of trying to remove fluoride from a person. But once you stop the source of fluoride, it will leave your bones and eventually leave your body. So all the time you're drinking fluoride, it's steadily accumulating in your bones. But your bones turn over. So if you stop the fluoride now, then it will dissipate. But Albert, she wants to know if you've been diagnosed with thyroid hypothyroidism and it's caused by fluoride, how do you get the fluoride out of your body?
Well, it will gradually disappear or be released from the body with time if you're on a low fluoride intake with water, beverages, and food, and there's natural elimination to the urine. It takes time. It'll vary with some people depending on age and how much has been built up. But in my case, the release of the pressure was very quick, within days and weeks, and pretty well back to normal after about 2 or 3 weeks. I wanted to mention one other thing. We wonder why city councils and county commissions and state legislatures are so quick to take the word of the health authorities that fluoridation is good and safe. Well, think about this. They've hired these people. They're paying them their money. It would be embarrassing for them to say, well, you're telling us something that's not right. People don't like to be embarrassed for hiring somebody that they thought was competent and then turned out not to be competent.
Yep. Yep. I would like to hear from somebody in this audience of ways that we can get this message. Obviously, it's very difficult to fill a hall. You don't have an enormous amount of money. You don't have their kind of money to run huge ads and stuff. What creative ways can you think of getting our message out to the mass of the people that are going to vote on November 6th? Yes?
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Bob. We don't have much time. A lot of it, I think, at this point would be just verbalization, talking to people on a random basis. You meet them, talk to them. Thank you. Each person that you speak with perhaps instigate a conversation regarding fluoridation of water. I most fortunately got to meet last month a nice young woman from Washington, D.C., traveling with her husband, with whom is a dentist with the CDC, and they're here in Wichita to help promote fluoridation of water. She asked me what I thought of it. I said, I don't want it. She asked me why. I said to her, I go, it is a toxin, it is a poison. I said, if I want to put poison in my body, I'll find a better way. And she said to me, well, it is good for your teeth. My husband is a dentist. And I said to her, I go, well, I believe if someone wants fluoridation, then they could take their child or themselves to a dentist and have that treatment done. That's if you stated in your lecture. And then she said to me, she was speechless. She said, well, I suppose that the best thing is to do your own research. I had to be educated. I did not know. I talked to strangers. That's all we can do. Get a form, meet with each other, and get it going. There's not a lot. Thank you.
Okay, I certainly endorse that. Talk to everybody. Raise the conversation. Wear these buttons. Use this button to trigger the conversation. My wife says if I have a choice between a physicist and a barber, on our campaign, I go to the barber every time. Go to the people that are going to talk. Give the message to the people that are going to talk to the customers. Now, we're winning the waitresses big time, right? In our meals.
Okay, two things. I substitute teach, so I see hundreds. I substitute teach, so I see hundreds of students every week, and I think probably maybe a fourth of them in Wichita have dental fluorosis. The problem is that none of the dentists will, they won't say you have dental fluorosis. They don't want to talk about it, and even if you try to put them on the spot and say, hey, this looks like dental fluorosis, they get extremely defensive. But I say, I just go in and I say, hey, you guys, you know those white spots that some people have on their teeth? And in every class you will get people nodding. I say, that's dental fluorosis. I say it's caused by too much fluoride. Or fluoride toxicity, or fluoride poisoning, or what, however brave I feel that day. And I say, yeah, it's coming up for a vote, on November the 6th. I said, if you're interested in, looking at it, it's spelled FL, and I spell it. Another thing, too, is that I think that when you say no, that people don't really look at things. Now, I made this and put out maybe 1,000 of them. It's got Mr. Ed on the front with dental fluorosis. It's got Barack Obama and Paris Hilton, with mild fluorosis. I like things that are so ludicrous. It's got like Call Me Crazy, just some different articles, but they're factual. I mean, they're right on. But I just don't want people to see no on it and not look further. There are people that were against it that read it anyway. So, sometimes a joke's good.
Okay, well that's a good suggestion, if I may say so, that not only wear this button, but if you do get into a conversation, make sure you have plenty of these leaflets in your pocket. So even if the conversation is very slow or very short, give them the leaflet. So you just trigger their interest and then keep it going. Other ideas, please. Other ideas for how to get this message out.
Thank you so much for coming. It was just really helpful, I think. I think one of the most effective things that could be done in a very short time frame, with the election coming so quickly, is for those of us who are here tonight who are coming from either medical background or like a doctor or science community to take the time, and it takes a little time, to write a well thought out letter to the editor that would influence a number of people, with some things that influenced you tonight from Dr. Connett's points, and just write out the most salient point you can think of. And put that in letter form. The deadline for the Eagle is Thursday.
And if you're writing a letter, may I suggest, we all want to write an essay, just write on one point. The shorter letter, the better. One point that you know very well, you feel strongly about, get that point over. And yes, definitely, I am a doctor of so-and-so. So if you've got the credentials, use them.
The internet, Facebook, Twitter, blogs, comments on articles from the Eagle, and comments on the news channels. You can make comments on all of those websites. And there are many different places on the internet, if you start looking, where you can talk about these things and actually get responses from other people and discuss them, and share it on Facebook.
Yeah. How many people have Facebook here? Well, I don't. I've never used it.
A daily fact.
Yeah.
500 of my friends.
Yeah, ask your 12-year-old. It's the kids. Where are you? That's it. You've got to be leading this.
Thank you again for coming here. And thank you for asking this important question on how we can mobilize our community. I just got back. I was late because I was with the volunteers waiting signs and giving away pamphlets on the east side of town in response to Wichita for Healthy Teeth doing the same thing. So we were just a half mile down the street from them, and we got a lot of thumbs up and people honking their horns in support. and we gave away several signs and a bunch of flyers. And I'm going to work on organizing some more of this weekend, probably in Old Town, on Friday, maybe Saturday in front of the Old Warren, and probably Sunday morning, try to hand out some pamphlets as people are leaving their churches. So I have a bunch of pamphlets, and if you're interested and able to help with that, if you're not already on our email list, do we have a place to sign up for that today?
Do we?
I think there's one out there.
There is.
Make sure you get your name on that list, and I'll make sure I'll create a Facebook announcement for this information, and I will make sure that that information goes out to our mailing list. Wichita's Postal Fluoridation. So if you're not on that, get on that. If you don't have email or something, come talk to me personally. I'll get your phone number. I'll call you if I have to.
Yeah, I like the idea of the wave. You want a wave? Why they didn't have the sports center, let's have a wave.
I was late attending your talk today because I had a...
It's going to affect all of us, our animals, and at least
So-
half an hour.
So if you go to our video, go to our webpage, just click on videos, that's the first video that comes up. Yes?
Could you comment specifically on the effect of fluoride for people with kidney disease, for people who are kidney donors, for people who are on dialysis?
Yes, it's very, very serious on dialysis. And if you use fluoridated water, you can kill patients on dialysis, number one. Number two, the problem with people with poor kidneys cannot remove the fluoride. So for the average healthy person, about 50% of the fluoride that comes into your body or more is excreted through the kidney. But when your kidneys begin to fail as you get older, you excrete less and less. And if you're sick, then this is a real problem. There is also some evidence that fluoride damages the kidney. And you can, if you go to our webpage, go to the health database, look up kidney, and you'll find a lot of information. Yes? You're next. You're ready?
When I'm talking with people, mainly I'm from an economic standpoint and stuff.
Yeah.
Our city council voted to raise our water bill already 50%, and they haven't even put in the cost factor of the cost of the fluoride if we do pass the fluoride.
Yeah.
So people are already complaining that they're not watering their yards because they can't afford the water and all that other stuff. I don't even sometimes get into the topic of the health deal or whatever. I said, look, who's going to pay for the $600,000 per year? $600,000 what? That's what it costs to buy the fluoride they want to put in the water.
Yeah.
And most people go, you mean they're going to raise my water bill again? Yeah. Well, I'm voting no.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, Money talks. What are you going to say to them?
Actually, vote no, something's not wrong with vote no or something.
Yeah, I love that. There's nothing wrong with voting no. That's good.
I talked to my postal carrier. Any of you who live in the city, in the area where the postal carrier goes door to door, you know they visit with everybody that comes to the door. If you happen to see them. And I've got my postal carrier handing out our flyers.
Oh! Very good, very good. Okay, I want to be the last one. Okay, go.
Everyone that's using social media, the flyers are available in PDF format, so you could include that in your Facebook pages or your emails to help distribute that.
How do you get that PDF? How do they get that download? Download. Download from where?
FluorideFreeKansas.org.
FluorideFreeKansas.org. You can download all the leaflets or something.
So we will be posting more.
They have a great website with lots of
You know, also, people that, your favorite radio station, call them up when they have a talk line.
Yes, talk
Or
line.
just say, the news people and say, would you please mention that there's fluoride alert about or that you should go do this before you vote?
Yeah. Did you call up yesterday when we were on just before the air? Was it you?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's someone. He said someone just called to say about the meeting he was about to announce anyways.
All right. I think every idea I heard is good. I think you can probably get 5 or 10 people on your Facebook to vote against fluoridation.
I think you can do good talking to your neighbors and your friends. But if you want to influence about maybe 500, go to Food for Thought on East Central and pick up 500 sheets. There's flyers there that we printed, and they're available. If you're closer,
There's some here.
yeah, there's some here.
I have 5,000 in my car.
Of those same ones? Okay, so,
Hey, can you bring them in now so that people can get them as they go out?
all right, so we need you to take those flyers and just hand them out at your favorite church or any church in the area. We want you to stand on the sidewalk so that you don't have to have permission, and get the mass schedule or the service schedule and be there and just hand those out. And
Who do you pay us?
yeah,
Who do you pay?
2 people should work together. That's nice in case, you know, that somebody says, well, you stepped over the line, you were on private property. But just stay on the sidewalk. That's public property. It is so easy. You just hand it out with a smile. They open the window. As soon as they see one taking one, they'll even open the window and have their arms sticking out to see what it is. And if they don't want one, don't bother them. My goodness, don't block them. The only way you're going to get in trouble is if you block them and try to force it on somebody that doesn't want it. Don't do that. But just be polite, smile, hand it to them, and don't hold them up so that the next car can get right in. And you can give away 500, and that's a really good way to influence an election. We've turned elections around that were just impossible by using this strategy. And it's cheap. And we don't have a lot of money. It's very effective, and we've got the printed material already. So let's make a good use of that printed material. Question? Pardon me?
Restaurants. I went to Navazio's Friday night. It's a really busy restaurant.
Hand it back.
Staff instead of next to the cash register. They let you. Everybody will let you. I haven't turned down yet. And when I got up to register to pay after dinner, there were 2 left.
No kidding. Well, let's hope that somebody didn't do the mean trick, which is somebody that's opposed to you, takes a handful and throws them in the trash. That can happen, so be careful about that. But yeah, you don't have to just distribute in church. Distribute them anywhere where there's Wichita voters. So thank you very much. I really want to thank Dr. Bergstaller and Dr.
And I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to thank all the organizers here. You've done a fantastic job. Diana, who I've known for a long time. Dorothy, I've just met for the first time, but she's my surrogate for the late June Allen. Thank you, Travis, for videotaping tonight.
My honor.
Thank you, Don Landis. I think it's incredible that you were able to come here despite your accident. There are leaflets and buttons. Make sure you wear this button. Have a few extra ones to get it out, because this is the way you talk without having to talk. Thank you, Don, for coming tonight. Thank you all. You've got a great bunch of activists here. You really have. Stephanie, who paid my airfare to get here. Thank you, Stephanie. I think we should all have a big thank you for Dr. Kenneth Howard, Kenneth Howard from Utah, who sent $10,000 to help win this campaign. You might think that's a lot of money. It's a spoonful compared to the enormous amount of money that they're spending on this. But we have the truth on our side. We have decency on our side. I put to you that I'm privileged. I talk to the best people in the world. Why do I say that? Nobody came tonight for this meeting to make money. Nobody came to this meeting to get power. People came to this meeting today because they're concerned about their children, they're concerned about their grandchildren, and they're concerned about their community. That makes you some of the best people in the world. We have that on our side. We don't take any shortcuts. We have the truth. Let's get it out there.